Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show, brought to you by the GoldSilverBitcoin.com store. We are more than honored to be sitting down today with Econoalchemist. You can find his work at Econoalchemist.com or also at twitter.com/Econoalchemist. And I believe you'll be at Bitcoin 2022 as well, which is coming up right around the corner.
Yep. Yeah. So that's going to be like the beginning of April. So I'll be presenting at Bitcoin 2022 and then also at the Guns and Bitcoin conference right after that.
All right, let's talk about those two things. So Bitcoin 2021 was perhaps one of the largest events on the planet over the last 2 years. I don't know if that's true. I suppose that sports picked up actually after in the wake of that. So let's just say at that point, it had been one of the biggest events with people there in the world. And in by then, 15 months approximately. And reported 12,000 people came out. I can neither confirm nor deny that's how many people were there, but there were definitely a lot of people there. I can confirm that. And the energy was palpable. The themes were very interesting. Inflation was on the minds of Bitcoiners already. It leaked into the mainstream press in the following months, I believe. And then also talk of central banks, debt, a Bitcoin standard, Ron Paul kicking it off and speaking about monetary choice really set the stage for what I think was one of the coolest conferences for sure I've ever been to. What are your thoughts?
I think what you've described is, pretty aligned with what I saw from afar. So I didn't go to the 2021 conference. But I think a lot of people were excited about it. And, a lot of people were excited about the El Salvador news that broke during the conference. I think there was a lot of good that came out of it for sure. There was definitely some things about the conference that, are generally like outside of the way I interact with Bitcoin. So I really focus on like self-custody and non-KYC and censorship resistance, home mining. So some of the topics there were, probably not quite aligned with how I approach Bitcoin, but they did have the free open source software area. So that was good to see. And I think they're getting a lot of support in that I don't want to say genre, but in that like section of the Bitcoin ecosystem. So they're going to be expanding at the 2022 conference, which is good to see.
So you talk about burning the bridge. I think that's the name of your blog, and it's also just I guess the name on your Twitter as well, which is at Econoalchemist. At least that's the URL. Yeah. What does burn the bridge mean to you?
So I started hanging on to that moniker, shortly after news of Coinbase selling user data to 3-letter agencies, in their chain analysis service packs. At the time, Brian Armstrong had recently wrote an article about building this bridge and, to bridging this gap between the old financial system and the new financial system. And my approach, the way I approached Bitcoin is that, this isn't trying to hang on to anything from the old financial system. This is a completely new financial system. And in fact, there's so much wrong with the old financial system that, I don't want anything spilling over into whatever comes next. And so he's over here, Brian Armstrong's over here trying to build this bridge and like bring the regulation and bring the KYC and just bring all the same problems that Bitcoin was originally designed to solve for in the first place. He's trying to bring all that into this new monetary system that we're entering. And my views are that no, like that bridge needs to burn. All that failed. The legacy system failed. It's broken, and it should not be brought into Bitcoin. And trying to force these like regulations into like the travel rule, for example, into the Bitcoin ecosystem is just not going to help Bitcoin do what it's designed to do. What that's going to do is just repeat the same mistakes we've had in the legacy system.
I sense that it's a fatalism and also a opportunity for people to make money by doing that. So people will say, well, we have to build these bridges because we want to have a seat at the table to discuss how the regulations are going to play out. We don't want these things to be outright banned, which I think makes sense. However, I do think that there's quite a bit of delusion in this notion that censorship resistance is going to be maintained if these two systems are married, that privacy is going to be maintained if these two systems are maintained. The crypto industry doesn't necessarily have, I don't think, the best hand at that table, regardless of the circumstances. And like you, when I first entered into this industry, this was about an alternative. It was about a standalone financial system, and it was about building out the tools in order to ensure that it could be standalone. And notions about fiat on ramps, off ramps were easily quelled by concepts of either Bitcoin becoming a more stable asset or commodity over time, and thus lending itself more towards like retail spending or just transactions, or there would be an alternative altcoin, which is something we don't speak about on this show, is altcoins. This is Bitcoin, my Bitcoin maximalist show. But back in the day, there was Litecoin. It was the silver to Bitcoin's gold, and it was supposed to be the commodity or crypto that you would spend. And it was supposed to be one standalone system without on ramps to the fiat world. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, just to kind of zoom out a little bit, in my opinion, Bitcoin is just software. So it's a tool, and tools can be used in many different ways. So some people are approaching Bitcoin as like strictly a store of value. Other people are approaching it like to use it as a conduit to accumulate more fiat by giving it to a trusted custodian, and so that they can trade on their exchange and then make those gains with it or make those losses with it. Other people like myself are using Bitcoin as a tool to transact without permission. And, so you've got all these different people out in the world with all these different problems, and they're using the same tool in all sorts of different ways. So, who am I to judge anyone else for using a tool how they see fit? I don't personally use KYC services, but other people might want to use KYC services simply to accumulate more Bitcoin because they're trying to use that as some sort of hedge against inflation, or they're trying to use it as some sort of tool to make more fiat. And that's fine. Like, I'm not trying to pass judgment, but I do think that there's a lot of trade-offs that come with that. And if too many people play into that, then I do think that it can really start affecting the people who are trying to use Bitcoin in a permissionless way, trying to use Bitcoin as that tool to interact economically peer-to-peer without any intermediaries. So, I think, who's to say what's right and wrong? I just think that, the way the opportunity I see with Bitcoin is the separation of money and state. And it would be a shame to lose that opportunity because people just wanted to smash the buy button on Cash App, and they wanted to hand over all of their information, and they wanted to bolster that legacy system that failed them in the first place, and it's just like, it'll be the greatest revolution that never happened. And that would just be a really sad opportunity to watch go by.
And so I believe on Cash App, you can't transfer the Bitcoins out of the app. You cannot withdraw Bitcoin. So that is essentially the marriage of Cash App and Bitcoin in a way that I don't think mean when we mention the separation of money and state. Now, of course, I think private money is a very noble concept, an interesting one as well. Like that's, I think it's an alternative to central bank printed, state printed money, but marrying Bitcoin, which is a decentralized autonomous network, with major massive corporations is certainly not in the interest of your vision of Bitcoin by any means. Could you speak about the separation of money and state and what you mean by that?
Well, yeah, like if you think about and I don't use Cash App personally. I was just using that as a course example, but um, so I don't know if you can withdraw Bitcoin or not, but some examples where you can't are like PayPal and Robinhood. And so you've got these people that are like wanting exposure to Bitcoin, and they can get that exposure without ever actually touching real Bitcoin itself. So, that really, in my opinion, harms this idea that, people are taking their money and they're giving it to PayPal, and there may not be any Bitcoin there at all. We don't know. Or they might be rehypothecating it. We don't know what PayPal is doing. So you get these people that are getting the satisfaction of having exposure to Bitcoin, but they're not actually using actual Bitcoin. And so it does that really help Bitcoin itself? And I don't think it does. I think that actually harms Bitcoin. It certainly keeps money that would have been going to Bitcoin directly getting diverted to some third party, like PayPal. So, if we can get to a place where there, when I say the separation of money and state, what I'm talking about is abolishing the Federal Reserve. Like that's what I want to see. I don't believe the Federal Reserve System is sound, and I think it's done a lot more harm than it has done good. And that's what I mean by separation of money and state.
You mentioned rehypothecating Bitcoin, and in the Federal Reserve System, it's a fractional reserve banking system in which only a
Right.
fraction of bank deposits are backed by actual cash on hand and available for withdrawal. Eric Voorhees wrote a lot on money and state before, I guess he probably got consumed by running shapeshift.io or .com now, I think. And he spoke about separating money and state. He is quoted in Bitcoin Magazine as saying, quote, "We all grew up in school, most of us, sadly, in public school. But nevertheless, we learn about this thing that happened hundreds of years ago, which was the separation of church and state. We learn why that was so important, that humans used to live in societies under which their religion, something very personal and precious to them as individuals, was under the management of an organization that could control those things. They could tell you what to worship and how, when, and why. Somehow, society realized perhaps that was unethical, that we shouldn't permit control of something so personal and important to your life to be controlled by the state." Now, he thinks that essentially the corollary of that today is the separation of money and state. He says also, quote, "It is that narrative of human development under which I believe that we now have other fights to fight. And I would say in the realm of Bitcoin, it is mainly the separation of money and state. Money is absolutely as fundamental to our lives as religion. And for many people, it is far more fundamental to their lives as religion. It affects how your life unfolds. The choices that you make about money dictate the ramifications of your life and those around you. And so to have an institution like money so controlled by a central entity, by a monopoly, is absurd. It is immoral. We should get rid of it." Any thoughts on what Mr. Voorhees said?
Yeah, I think my ideas are pretty aligned with his in regards to the separation of money and state. I do think, money is something personal and it shouldn't be controlled by the state, similar to religion. And I do believe, like, as of 2019, there's actually not even a fractional reserve requirement any longer. I do believe there's a zero reserve free for all going on. Because things in the financial system started getting kind of shaky at the end of 2019, and then coronavirus became a thing and the pandemic started, and then all hell has broken loose since then. But if you, I don't think there is a fractional reserve requirement any longer. And it's really like, if we kind of think about what has happened since the central banking has become a thing, especially in the United States, like they needed a way to pay the interest on the money they were borrowing from the Federal Reserve, or that the Federal Reserve was printing for the United States. And that's when they implemented the income tax. And, I'm not even talking about like Medicaid or Social Security. I'm just specifically talking about the income tax, which is used to pay the interest on the money that's been printed by the central bank. And so you get this like centralized authority that isn't representative of the population because they're not elected officials. You get like one person at the Federal Reserve that's like airdropped by the president of the United States into that position. And that's pretty much where that relationship ends. So that you're forced to use this money that you have zero say in that, how that policy is managed. And not only that, but then a portion of your labor is taken out of your paycheck before it even hits your bank account from your employer and used to pay for that money. It's just really disturbing, and I don't agree with it. And I think Bitcoin is a much better system.
So system's the key word there. That's why we want to burn the bridge, so to speak. And you tweeted recently that January 3rd, which is the day that Satoshi released Bitcoin, is also proof of keys day. And so proof of keys day, Bitcoiners participate in it by taking possession of all Bitcoins held by third parties. Quote, he reads the movement's website. Quote, by demanding and taking possession of their assets, individuals will learn real fast with blockchain proof whether they are part of the elite hodlers or not. Proof of keys is the annual hodler initiation. And so obviously the proof of keys movement, if you're holding Bitcoins on Cash App or on PayPal or these other apps where you're not able to transfer out of, you're not a hodler. Actually, it's way more akin to like when you are walking down the street and you jump on a bird, I think they're called. Is that one of those like scooters? And so you scoot around town. You don't own that scooter. You're renting it. Just like if you can't transfer your Bitcoin off of the app where it's held, you're like literally renting, or like, so you're not even renting them.
It's an
what the
IOU.
Heck are you doing?
You're getting an IOU from a central authority.
But then the fine print says like, and also we will never give you these Bitcoins. So it's an IOU for something that you can never claim. You just like,
right.
It's like holding Bitcoins with whatever comes before a tricycle. Maybe like a plastic little like bike, right? You're like in those little children's bikes. That's what it is when you hold Cash App on Bitcoin on PayPal.
It's kind of a tough analogy to make. It's you're basically just getting completely hosed. Like you're being sold the ideas of Bitcoin and like the ethos of Bitcoin, but that's not what's being delivered. You're really just getting a spot on a spreadsheet on some database in some corporation headquarters that tells you what your equivalent holdings are worth in US dollars. But there's no guarantee that there's actually any Bitcoin there. Or that like, let's say you buy a Bitcoin on PayPal and it shows up in your account, and I buy a Bitcoin on PayPal and it shows up in my account. Are there really two Bitcoins at PayPal? Like, I don't think there is, and I don't think there's any good system in place to guarantee that. And it's just this whole idea of trying to take that third party risk and like integrate it with Bitcoin, that I just think the whole thing just needs to be done away with. It doesn't have any place in Bitcoin. That's not what it's here for. That for me, that's not what it's here for.
So we've got proof of keys day coming up, and I think Trace Mayer was maybe the individual who developed that idea. And so he says that, and I interviewed him for an article that appears at Forbes.com. He says proof of keys is a celebration of our monetary sovereignty, explains Trace Mayer. We do that by actually flexing our monetary muscles. We show how strong we are, and we do that by proving the keys. We run a full node and we hold our own private keys to our Bitcoin and any other crypto at Third Litecoin, etc., said Mayer. And we withdraw all of our crypto from any third party, from any exchange, from any lending service, from anywhere. We don't necessarily know who the bad actors are until we start flexing those monetary sovereignty muscles. So proof of keys is how we do that. Centralized third parties having giant stockpiles of Bitcoin and crypto goes against the decentralization characteristics or nature of the blockchain. He also has a good quote in here, I remember, where he talks about essentially that these people, these custodians of Bitcoin who want to hold your Bitcoins, they want you to be basically like weak. So he says other people, they want to whittle your monetary sovereignty away from you. They want to take your monetary sovereignty. They want you to be a weak little flaccid slave who has to ask them for permission to do stuff. You get what I'm saying? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like Trace Mayer, and even though he got a bad rap for the Mimble Wimble coin thing, like I really enjoyed listening to his podcasts and seeing the way he operated on Twitter. I thought he did a lot of good for this space, and I think what he's saying in those quotes is pretty accurate, and um, I agree with his observation that you are more easily controlled when you are weak and flaccid and dependent on those custodians, on those parasitic third parties that try to inject themselves in between you and the economy. Like, there's no reason I should have to ask anyone for permission to spend my money, and there's no reason that any sort of third parties or corporations or banks moral standards should get in the way of being able to decide whether or not I can execute a transaction. Like, that's my money. It's none of anyone's business. And, so I think that's really where like the root of like my privacy and self-custody drive comes from, is just getting away from these permission systems and getting away from the traps of being censored.
So you're tweeting about proof of keys days. Can you kind of give a background on why it's important to you and why it fits with the burn the bridge movement?
Yeah, I think I I don't know if burn the bridge is a movement, but um, I think it's important for awareness to be raised about proof of keys, because if you're trusting a third party custodian to hold your keys, there's a number of things that can go wrong with that situation. That I'm not aware of any custodians that are FDIC'd or what is it, SIPC insured. So like, compared to like traditional assets in like a brokerage account, if something goes catastrophically wrong, you've got some like insurance there to cover you. But if you are holding Bitcoin or you're having someone hold Bitcoin on your behalf, there's no safety net there for you, as we saw with the people who were using Mt. Gox when that exchange was hacked, or people that were using Quadriga CX up in Canada when the only person with the keys to that exchange like mysteriously died on honeymoon in India. So you're exposing yourself to not only the risk of the exchange running off with your coins, or the exchange deciding that you can't make a transaction or you can't withdraw your money from them any longer. And like, another threat is if the government decides to initiate some sort of like 6102 style executive order, they can just go to those exchanges and tell the exchanges like, okay, like flip the switch, delete that withdraw button from your app. And then like, then what are you going to do? So not only that, but you're also giving these exchanges all of your KYC information so that you can have that custodial relationship with them. And so that really creates two major problems. And it's like, if they get hacked, then where does that information go? It goes to the dark web. It gets into the hands of violent criminals. And then you get your door kicked in and a gun pointed at your head until you turn over your signing keys for that Bitcoin. And so, or if the government decides to do like unrealized capital gains or some sort of wealth tax, as they've already set precedents for in Argentina, then like they have all your information and you're really stuck. So like your freedom to escape that legacy system is now being infringed upon because you've developed that trusted relationship with the custodian. So like there's just so many problems that arise out of trusting a third party with your Bitcoin that can all be mitigated if you just take control and take some radical responsibility and hold your keys yourself. And so that's what proof of keys is about to me, is just taking back that control and having that sovereignty and knowing that you have the power to ensure that you do not have to live with permission and ensure that you will not be censored in your efforts to interact economically with the world around you.
You use the term radical responsibility, and a term that I've been throwing around in my own head is like radical individual. And I do see that taking radical responsibility towards your Bitcoin is what a radical individual does. Can you kind of explain? Now people are like, wow, I didn't think about this. Like there could even be a bail-in that is applied to Coinbase, and then a percentage of your holdings are then contributed to this bail-in. So can you speak to people now? Like what's the toolkit to get out of the hybrid traditional Bitcoin system, that this Frankenstein that's being developed, so that we can have a more pure Bitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, you know, I think it's important for people to understand like taking self-custody is a really good and important first step, and I definitely encourage it. But it's important to understand that there's really nothing you can do to erase what I call a KYC event, which is the record that's on file with the trusted party that you bought the Bitcoin from. They have all of your information. They have your selfie holding your ID, and there's really nothing you can do to remove that information or to remove that record of transactions from that external centralized database that they have on you. So I think that's important for people to understand, is that once you KYC, like that's there forever. Now, even if you KYC and you have the option to withdraw your Bitcoin and take self-custody of it, like you should take self-custody of it, because at least you're mitigating all those risks that come into play when you're trusting someone else with your coins. Doesn't necessarily mitigate the KYC risk you've exposed yourself to, but at least you have control of the Bitcoin now. And so after that point, you know, if someone makes the decision that they want to take self-custody and they see the risks in using KYC services to get there, the first thing I would suggest is to just stop using KYC services. There's a number of other ways you can go about accumulating Bitcoin. You can earn it in exchange for goods and services. You can use cash at an ATM to acquire it, and you can mine it at home. And you know, those are all topics that I cover on my blog, and you can find some more information about that there. But obviously, those are not going to be as convenient as smashing the buy button on an application, but they do mitigate the risks that are associated with giving over all your identifying information to a central authority who is turning around and selling that to 3-letter agencies. And then once you have your Bitcoin, like, you have to decide, do you want to have it in like a mobile wallet or like a desktop wallet or a hardware wallet? And I cover how to use all of those different kinds of wallets on my blog as well. Some mobile wallets that I really like are like Samurai Wallet. It's available on Android. It has a built-in CoinJoin implementation called Whirlpool. And what Whirlpool does is it's going to break those deterministic links from your past transaction history to your future transactions. And it's going to give you forward-looking anonymity. And that can be a really powerful tool in trying to move away from those KYC events that you may have been tied to when you took self-custody.
What are some of the tools that you use and that people need to consider getting? So for instance, I've spoken with a gentleman who runs Purism laptops, which was the suggestion of Trace Mayer when I spoke with him. Now he likes Purism laptops because they aren't associated with being a Bitcoin wallet, a Bitcoin hardware. He suggests, Trace does, that perhaps Ledger is actually a point of failure. And Purism laptops, their whole like MO is that they, first of all, they can be disabled from the internet. Second of all, they are setting up a system which is, from their marketing communications perspective, supposed to like not be penetrable by 3-letter agencies and everyone who wants to read your information insofar as possible. So what are some of like the tools that you've come across that you think are real neat that are helping us build this Bitcoin ecosystem?
So I haven't really heard of, and I certainly haven't tried Prism. It does sound interesting though. If someone wants to use a laptop, I think, and they're very worried about like, eavesdropping or some sort of backdoor, or just like even leaving any sort of like digital trace of what they were doing online or on that computer. There's a program called Tails that can be used, that it's basically like a stateless operating system on a USB stick. And so you put this USB stick in the laptop and you boot from there. And then you have this operating environment that is like completely wiped. It doesn't save any of the information about what happened during that session while it was active. So I know a lot of people use Tails that have concerns that Tails can solve for. But, I think having a hardware wallet is a really good idea. I'm not quite sure exactly what Trace was alluding to there in regards to Ledger.
Like, for instance, they have your address, I believe was maybe one of his.
Yeah. And you had was it Ledger wallet that had like the database breach and like all the customer information was put out there? That was Ledger, right?
A Ledger data leak, a simple mistake exposed 270,000 crypto. Yeah. This was December 24th, 2020 in Cointelegraph, 270,000 crypto wallet buyers.
Yeah. I couldn't remember if it was Trezor or Ledger, but yeah, it was Ledger now that I recall. And I think the final numbers actually came in closer to like 1 million users. So yeah, I mean, dude, another great tool that people should just use in general is a PO box. Like, they're cheap. You can have UPS or any of those like other third-party carriers deliver to the PO box using the street addressing format. So you're not like restricted to the United States Postal Service. But the great thing about a PO box is that you don't expose your actual physical address or where you live or where you work. So, if you are buying like any sort of Bitcoin related hardware, like an ASIC or a hardware wallet, then it's a good idea to have it shipped to a PO box, just because once you put that information out there, you never know whose hands it's going to wind up in. or what they're going to do with that information. And I think the Ledger data breach is a great example. And if I recall correctly, one of the cases of a gentleman who was beaten bloody in Canada for his signing keys was a direct result of that Ledger data breach. So, I think demand for Bitcoin is going to continue to increase, and the value of Bitcoin will continue to increase. And as it does, the demand and value of information related to individuals who hold Bitcoin is also going to increase. And the lengths at which violent criminals will go to get that information are also going to increase.
Bitcoin and guns. I think now's appropriate time to talk about that. What is going on at that event? And then what is this Bitcoin and guns notion?
Yeah, so Guns and Bitcoin it's a freedom technology conference. This coming April will be the third year that they've hosted the conference. The first 2 years were in Texas. I missed the first one, but I did present at the second one last April. And I'll be presenting at the next one in Miami this coming April. And the Freedom Technology Conference is where you get these like two different technologies. You get Bitcoin and you get 3D printed guns. And both of these technologies have a lot of crossover. They're really meant to be like censorship resistant. So there's really nothing that can be done to stop people from printing 3D guns. And that is powerful for people who don't have access to guns or don't have access to the means to protect themselves. And so I think that goes hand in hand with Bitcoin because you're taking self-custody. So now you've got this radical responsibility on your hands to take care of that Bitcoin. You can't trust that it's in some safe at a like well-guarded institution. Like you have taken that responsibility on. So, your keys guard your coins and your guns guard your keys. And so if you can equip yourself to defend yourself, then you're in a much better position to continue interacting with the world in a censorship resistant way and interacting with the world in a way that you don't have to ask anyone's permission because you have equipped yourself with the tools and the know-how to do that yourself.
What are some of the conversations that take place at Guns in Bitcoin, for example?
Yeah, so like one of the memorable conversations, the conference organizer, Ragnar, he gave a presentation on like what's been going on in the world and how we're kind of seeing this like merge of government and academia and the media all kind of converging together to like drive a certain kind of narrative. And I think if you look back at like the last 2 years with coronavirus, you can really see how it can be uncomfortable and it can be difficult to have an opinion about what's going on with the pandemic that's not aligned with the news headlines or an opinion that's not aligned with what the CDC is publishing. And so, and then you start getting like these laws that get passed. And so in his presentation, he talked about how the pendulum swings. And, one of the things that stuck with me was like, you can just be living your life doing what is perfectly legal today. And you could wake up tomorrow a criminal because that pendulum has swung right past you. And suddenly the things that were totally fine yesterday are no longer legal today. So I think like one kind of like coarse example is just like having Thanksgiving with your family. Like that was totally fine a while ago. And now you're not supposed to have Thanksgiving with your family. I'm not saying you're going to be like prosecuted as a criminal for doing it, but in certain places, I do believe that there are like checks being done by authority figures and tickets being handed out by authority figures. I haven't experienced that personally, but it's just surprising to like look back and see how quick that landscape has changed. So he talked in that presentation about having the muscle or the guns to notch out some sovereignty for yourself, and like having the money or the Bitcoin to do that, and having the membership or the community to do that. So he talked about how it takes all these things to come together, and how guns and Bitcoin is freedom technology that can really be used to help individuals maintain their sovereignty. Another great presentation was done by Cody Wilson, and he like went into the history of what happened with his 3D gun printing efforts, and like some of the legal like cases that have come up since then, and the legal battles that he's been fighting since then. And he really like drilled into the interpretations of the laws, and he's talking about how there's no like there's no like legal justification for 3D printed guns to be criminalized. So he had some really interesting points about that. My presentation was on like mining Bitcoin at home. Samurai Wallet gave a presentation on their wallet and some initiatives that they've got going forward. Ronin Dojo gave a presentation, Diverter gave a presentation. There was a lot of great discussions had, and it all had to do with using Bitcoin as a tool to guard your sovereignty and defend your privacy, and 3D printed guns.
You mentioned it's hard to have a opinion against the grain in regards to COVID-19. And I think that that's something that people have experienced all throughout human history. Those who have had ideas of their own, thought for themselves rationally and with perspective, have always been ostracized. And so I think a lot of those people that maybe have questions, period, are experiencing what people have experienced for a long time. And then now I did notice that at Bitcoin 2021 that this was somewhat of an overlap between a lot of the topics that the American conservative movement, and libertarians were having, and what the Bitcoiners were having. And I think guns and Bitcoin is just one more example of that. As we start to wrap up here, I did want to talk a little bit about at-home Bitcoin mining. I think when people think about Bitcoin or rather home mining, they think about needing to enter into a altcoin early when the hash rate's low so that they can take advantage of that arbitrage. But you're talking about on your blog, Bitcoin mining. Can you kind of at home, can you break that down?
Yeah. And I just want to back up for a second. I think it is noteworthy that like there is zero political affiliation or ideology attached to guns and Bitcoin. It is an open platform for anyone and everyone from like any walk of life, any political background, any gender, any race. Like it's completely neutral. It's about the freedom technology. And I just think it's important to mention that because there was a recent Huffington Post hit piece on guns and Bitcoin that tried associating them with like these alt-right extremist groups. And that's not what goes on at the conference, and that's not what it's about.
So I see an opportunity there to unite disparate forces in the world, in the country, that are heretofore not yet united. Like, for instance, somebody critiqued the Bitcoin conference last year. They felt like they were at a Q event. Okay,
Like a
whatever.
QAnon event.
Yeah, they felt like they were at a QAnon event. So whatever.
Yeah.
However, I recognize, I was like, wow, there is an overlap between these two movements and they have yet to converge. So they will converge. And I think that we should be aware of this coming convergence, which I think is just has only become more obvious since that time. And um, I'm not promoting any sort of like partisanship by any means. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think, sure, Bitcoin is going to converge with all kinds of groups, because it's just software and it's just a tool that can be used however the user wants to use it or however they see fit, So yeah, you're going to have right-wing extremists using it. You're going to have left-wing extremists using it. You're going to have poor people using it. You're going to have rich people using it. You're going to have individuals fighting for their freedoms. You're going to have governments trying to enforce tyranny. Like everybody's going to be using it, and Bitcoin is for enemies. So, yeah, it is going to converge with all sorts of groups and all sorts of people, and it is just a matter of time. And um, I do think, what you alluded to with like the libertarians, I think they were kind of those libertarian minded individuals probably saw more potential in how to use Bitcoin as a tool for what they valued earlier on than most people. So I think you do see a lot of like libertarian people there just because they got there first right now. But there's a lot of people coming into the space every day from all sorts of walks of life. And yeah, it's going to be converged with everybody.
And so at home mining, how can all these
Yeah.
people like think about that?
So yeah, there was like these narratives that mining at Bitcoin wasn't profitable. You were going to be wasting the money you were spending on electricity. You would just be better off buying Bitcoin at an exchange. And I believed those narratives for a long time, but I had decided that I wasn't going to use KYC services. And I really wanted to accumulate more Bitcoin somehow. And so I started looking at mining. It didn't really make any sense to me. And Diverter wrote Mining for the Streets. I got my hands on his guide. And in that guide, he really like took those narratives and broke them down in a way that made mining at home the solution to a lot of those problems that I had. And so I decided to give it a shot, and then I just documented my whole process and put that together in my guide. And it was, critiqued pretty heavily at the beginning by people who were saying like dismissing it and saying like, no, you can't mine at home. It's not profitable. But, the numbers don't lie. And we've gone a full year now since I've released that article. And I have only seen more and more home miners join this home mining renaissance. So there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. Like you're bringing a piece of industrial equipment into your home, and you are going to have a lot of heat to deal with. You're going to have a lot of noise to deal with. So I think just putting out as much information about how to handle those environmental variables will help people assess whether or not mining at home makes sense for them. And from what I've seen, a lot of people are deciding that it does make sense for them.
What are some of the factors they're considering?
Well, like electricity price is a major consideration. So they're going to, be paying for the energy it takes to run that ASIC. And based on their kilowatt hour rate, they might be in a position where their energy is so expensive that it doesn't really make sense to mine at home. But there's a lot of interesting resources out there, and one of them is the Brains calculator, Brains OS. And I think it's like insights.brains.com. And if you go on there, you can see like the break even kilowatt hour rate for a number of different ASICs that are on the market. And some of these new gen ASICs, like they break even at 45, 47 cents a kilowatt hour, which means that if you're paying anything less than 45 cents a kilowatt hour, then that's how much of a discount you're getting on your Bitcoin. And like, that's how much headroom you have to go in your like electricity price before it doesn't make sense, or before you're just like breaking even.
So let's talk about that real quick. I just pulled up a government website with the annual average price per kilowatt hour by state. The first three, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Idaho, at between 7.71 cents per kilowatt hour and 7.89 cents per kilowatt hour. And then number 4 is Washington, which surprises me because there was a burgeoning mining scene around a hydroelectric dam in Washington. I'm surprised to see that Idaho, which is where I am, is actually cheaper. Wyoming comes in 5th place. Obviously, we're familiar with the approach Wyoming has taken to blockchain technology. And then some other states of interest. Texas is number 9 at 8.6 cents per kilowatt hour. And then let's take a look here. We'll go on down. I'm looking at South Dakota. I can't pull it up, but the last place we get Hawaii at 28.72 cents per kilowatt hour. That's real expensive. Alaska too at 20.22. Florida, I know that's of interest. That's at 10.44 cents per kilowatt hour. That's ranked 33rd in the nation. And ranked 28th is South Dakota, 9.96, where obviously I think there were no lockdowns, so that's of interest. But interesting to see here that if you're in Louisiana, Oklahoma, Idaho, Washington, Wyoming, perhaps this is something that you might look into, and many other states. So what else do people need to know about at-home Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, I just to touch on those states, like I think it's the vast majority of people are in a position where mining makes sense right now. I'm looking at that insights.brains.com website, and like even an S9 ASIC, its break-even rate right now is 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So even if you have a piece of hardware that's going on 5 years old and only producing like 12 or 13 terahash, that is still profitable if you're paying less than 12 cents per kilowatt hour.
So the national average is 10.54 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yeah. So, I think if you're in the national average, like, I'm looking at this website, like the new gen ASICs, I said 45 cents earlier, but that's changed. It's like closer to 30 cents right now. But yeah, if you have like a new gen Whatsminer, your break even is 30 cents. If you have a new gen Antminer, the S19, your break even is 34 cents. So like, if you're paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour, you're getting, for the amount of money you're spending on electricity, your dollar cost averaging through your utility bill into non-KYC Bitcoin for a 60% discount against spot price. So you're actually like accumulating Bitcoin. Your money, the money that you're spending running that ASIC is getting you more Bitcoin than you would have been able to get if you had taken that money and daily dollar cost averaged into Bitcoin, and you're not exposing yourself to the KYC risks. But I think it's important for people who want to mine at home to understand that there's like a lot of variables that go into play with ensuring that this makes sense for you. So one of those variables is the overall network hash rate. And as more miners join the network and that hash rate increases, well, you as a solo miner only have a small static input to that overall hash rate. And so if your input stays the same, but the overall network hash rate grows, then your proportional contribution to that network is shrinking. And so therefore your rewards are also going to shrink. So, you do need to be aware of the hash rate overall And then also like the difficulty is going to adjust every 2016 blocks based on how long it's been taking in between blocks to try and keep it on that 10-minute average. And that difficulty adjustment can have a drastic effect on your mining rewards. And that's very closely tied to how much hash rate is going on and offline. And then, just the price of Bitcoin, because it's really difficult to decouple from that US dollar to Bitcoin index, because you are paying your electricity bill in US dollars. So the price of Bitcoin as it changes, that's in the value of the rewards you're getting in US dollars is going to change every day. So it is stuff to keep an eye on. But for the average American paying 10 cents, 13 cents a kilowatt hour, like, you are in a really good position to be able to mine for a long time if you have a new gen ASIC.
We've had the honor and privilege of sitting down today with Econoalchemist. You can find Econoalchemist's work at econoalchemist.com. He's also very active at Twitter at Econoalchemist. Thank you so much, Mr. Alchemist, for joining us today.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening.